Hello and welcome to American Stories. I'm Saida Pagan. Our guest for this episode is actress and producer Julie Carmen. You may have seen her in films such as the Milagro Beanfield War or on TV shows such as Grey's Anatomy. Her latest project is a documentary about her great-grandfather, José Manuel Jiménez Beroa. He was an acclaimed 19th century classical musician whose work has now been rediscovered and is again being applauded around the globe. Welcome to our program, Julie.
Thank you, Said. I'm so happy to be here to talk to you about it.
I'm so happy to have you. Now, Julie, we know that there are many innovative ways that you have come up with to help those who are interested support you in your project in making this documentary. But before we delve into that, let's talk about the man himself, your great-grandfather, an Afro-Cuban classical musician from the 1800s. Tell us about him.
Well, my family, and we've now found all of the 23 living descendants, most of whom we knew, and we found a whole new branch of the family. We all knew about Lico, but some of us hadn't met each other. And his music was pretty much lost, other than Alejo Carpentier, a famous musicologist who had written about him. And then when a book by Dr. Olavo Alen and Dr. Gudrun Weber from Germany and Cuba wrote about him, we were invited to the book launch by the Goethe Institute, and a musicologist named Isidro Betancourt, who was getting his master's on Lico Jiménez, he came to the United States from Spain and interviewed my mom and my brother and me and our kids and my brother's kids, and the story started evolving. And I asked Isidro if he had ever made a documentary before and if he needed any help. So he said yes, he needed help with the production and financing, and I didn't have the money to put into it myself, so I started applying for grants. And as we all know, grants have pretty much dried up for the arts. So I'm using other creative ways. So Lico Jimenez was born in Trinidad, Cuba in 1851 to a family of renowned classical musicians. His grandparents had escaped Saint-Domingue during the Haitian Revolution, and they were already a renowned conductor, cellist, clarinetist, pianist, and his aunt Catalina Berroa was only 2 years older, but they grew up in the same house, and both Lico's parents and Catalina's parents played amazing piano, classical. Lico's father was the first Afro-Cuban, first Black musician in the Gewandhaus Orchestra in Leipzig, Germany in 1850, 53, 54. And we went to Leipzig, and they led us into the archives where we saw the book where he signed as an incoming student. And he was with the orchestra for 5 years as first violin, which opened eyes and broke barriers in Germany in 1850 to have a first violin of Afro-Cuban descent.
And what happened to his music? What happened from there?
When he died in 1917, he was the subdirector of the Hamburg Conservatory of Music, and his music disappeared, other than what my mother and grandmother took with them when they fled Hamburg in 1943, just 20 days before Hamburg was bombed. They fled to Spain. They all had Spanish passports because Lico, being Cuban, and Lico's 3 children, Adolfo, my grandfather, was the vice consul of Spain in Hamburg, and Adolfo was able to get them passports to leave and as Spanish citizens and go to Spain. And they took the music with them, and it just sat in my mother's Empire secretary for all these years. And during the recent fires in California, I evacuated a lot of the family heirlooms. Anyway, so what happened to his music? It wasn't really played, and then Isidro Betancourt republished it for the first time in 150 years. He republished the symphony, which is what you're hearing little bits of now. Marlena Urbay from the Florida Chamber Orchestra. She performed Estudio Sinfónico, the symphony that Lico wrote in October 2023, October 8th, and we were there. And Lico's first son, Angel, his family lives in Miami, and Isi Zambrana put on a gorgeous concert at the Miami-Dade Auditorium, which sold out. So, and since then, the chamber music has been performed by Maria Newman and Scott Hosfeld and their chamber music group called MAMA, MAHMA, and then it's been performed in different soirees and salons. And now we are having our first music competition.
Tell us about what you are doing to allow people who are interested in your fascinating story and the fascinating story of your ancestors. How can they help? Tell us about that.
So what I did was just I got creative. I scheduled some travel experiences and people came and that helped with some of our editing budget. But editing is very expensive when you need to do all the deliverables. And so we are doing one more event and it's on the Queen Mary. And I've rented 20 cabins, which have been recently renovated. They're gorgeous. There's pictures of them and we rented the Royal Salon. And all of this is a big leap of faith because I've heard so much enthusiasm about the project that I feel we can bring people together for a kind of Belle Epoque weekend experience. And we're inviting all the advanced violinists, opera singers, art song performers, and pianists, of course, to compete with Lico's music aboard the Queen Mary on Sunday, December 7th, which would have been Lico's 174th birthday. So we're calling it a sleepover birthday party, and we're getting incredible responses from San Diego to San Francisco. All the great music schools are responding, and a lot of historians are responding, and art song aficionados. Art song is really an art form of the Romantic era. People say it sounds like movie music. Well, it was before movies. So movies were inspired by art song. We're very, very advanced piano. And he was called the father, of Cuban lead and or German leader sung in Spanish with a 19th century Cuban diction. But he was also called the Ebony Liszt because he was dear friends with Franz Liszt, and they played some of the same pieces. And Lico performed many Franz Liszt pieces throughout in 200 concerts around Europe. So anyway, the book that came out shows a picture that was taken as the promo picture at the Gewandhaus, and it is Lico here standing, his father, who was the first violinist at the Gewandhaus Orchestra, and his half-brother Nicasio Jiménez, who was beloved and ended up dying in Tours, France, where he married and had a child.
Take us back to your great grandfather's childhood. I understand he was a child prodigy.
Yes, he performed at age 12, 13, 14 at the Palacio Cantero. Palacio Cantero in Trinidad, Cuba was built by the king of sugar barons. He enslaved people. There were 800,000 enslaved people of African descent in Cuba, which is a small island. And over the period of colonial years, and since Lico and his father and relatives arrived as free Blacks, which was a category where 1/6 of the Black population in Cuba during Lico's lifetime were free Blacks. and many of them were musicians who came from Haiti. What makes this documentary different from just a Wikipedia page about somebody's ancestor is that in order to interview all 23 living descendants, we actually went with our director and cameraman and sound man, who are also producers on the film. They have a company called Malditos Artistas and Luxmart Fotogramas. They're in Galicia, Spain. And we traveled from Hamburg to Leipzig to Bayreuth to Nuremberg. And I drove the minivan with all of them and descendants from Ibiza, Bretagne, and Paris. And my brother from New York. So that side, the European side of the family, drove through Germany doing the interviews, and also and we saw the grave of Franz Liszt, and we went to where they performed in the Golden Anchor, which is next to the Wagner Opera House in Bayreuth. And we've unearthed the history of this family, but also unearthed certain traits, survival traits, that have kept the flame alive. And we've identified 9 generations of musicians and artists. And we've gone to the homes of all 23 descendants. It has been so eye-opening, not only finding Lico's descendants, but seeing the places where he performed inside Teatro Terry in Cienfuegos, Cuba, where he inaugurated that theater in 1890. And the theater was built by a cutting-edge architect from Italy, where the floor was like this. So anywhere you sat and anywhere the performance was, everybody could see. And then underneath there was a crane, and the floor lifted up and it became a dance hall, Teatro Terry. And the local dancers who've now read the book about Lico, they surprised me with a dance performance to one of his pieces called El Asra. And then we traveled to Miami for the recording of the Estudio Sinfónico that the Florida Chamber Orchestra did, and also the art songs. The top soprano from Galicia, Teresa Novoa, who sang with Montserrat Caballé. She's an extraordinary, extraordinary mezzo-soprano, and she recorded all of Lico's songs with pianist Jessica Sanchez Rebollido, and they performed in the Miami-Dade Auditorium the art songs. And they're just it cracks your heart open. It's a genre of music that we're going to bring back into popularity because of the attunement, the sensitivity between the pianist, very difficult advanced piano music, and the poems. Lico took the romantic poems from the era by the great classic romantic poets from Spain, and he put music to them. And that's what art songs are. So they are sung on the record called Homage. Gabriel Urgel Reyes and Isidro Betancourt, they produced the album Homage. So if you look on Apple Music and Spotify and all of the title, you can look up Gabriel Urgel Reyes and his music of Lico Jiménez called Homage. Anyway, so we've traveled to 6 countries, 15 cities, to interview the 23 descendants and to look at the places where he performed. And now our goal is to raise the money to be able to have emerging musicians in all of the different cities where Lico performed, 200 cities throughout Europe with his Jiménez trio. And have emerging musicians perform in these historically significant venues from the 19th century, which some of them were not bombed and some still are cultural centers. So it's a way to reinvigorate cultural centers that are all hurting around the world because a lot of the trauma that's been happening globally.
How do you feel knowing that you were part of this movement, this revival, and then meeting all of these cousins that you had never met before? What was that experience like?
Well, we actually didn't even know who they were. My brother, as a medical doctor, He traveled a lot and was always looking for the Jiménez trio. My brother is not only an MD, PhD in public health, but he's also a world-class conguero, and he plays with Joaquin Pozo in New York. But he played back in the day with some of the great Cuban congueros and conjuntos. And we were always looking for the name Jiménez, but they have the name Zambrana because Lico maybe didn't know that he had a baby that he left behind, Angel Zambrana. So Angel took his mother's name, and the family, who we've now grown to know and love, are named Zambrana.
What kind of reaction have you received from the general public? I know you talked a little bit about it, but just an amazing sort of thing that you're doing, bringing back this music and this, bringing this individual to life again.
All the years in Hollywood, I didn't ever get the kind of enthusiasm that I'm getting with this Lico Jimenez project because it's so much bigger than me. It's not about me. It's about 9 generations, and it's about the traits that kept this music alive. And it's about encouraging new artists to learn the music. And when they hear the music, you see them just open their minds. They just say, wow, I had no idea it sounded like that. And the lyrics are about nature, about full moon, about love, about history. And the music is just the the way that Lico composed really touches people. So I think that I just feel like a conduit, that it's coming through us, this project, and it makes people open their pocketbooks, and I've gotten donations from people, from friends. It's 100% financed from small donations from friends. And I am incredibly, incredibly grateful at a time when people have lost their homes, people have lost their health insurance. There is still a group of people that say, well, let's keep Afro-Cuban classical music and art song alive. It blows my mind every time I receive something like that. And I'm very, 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 very frugal in terms of doing everything for free, and people are volunteering. Nobody's been paid on this film, which is embarrassing as a union member. But for a documentary, it's like press. You do it for the love of the subject. But then there are editing costs and hard drive costs and Best Buy and Photocam and all of those costs that we just can't get around. And airlines, we had to fly to Germany. So you asked about travel. Last year, my brother and I flew to Hamburg, and we met up with the grand niece of Lico's wife, and she's in her 80s, lives in Hamburg. We met with all of her family. And then Lico's daughter, Andrea, two of her 3 children and grandson came. And Lico's other daughter, Manuela, didn't have children, but she was the pianist in the silent movies in Berlin. So she took all of that piano talent and she used it improvising in the silent movies in the 1920s and 1930s. In 1933, she fled to Santo Domingo and then to Cuba, where she became very famous. Manuela Jimenez was her name. And she eventually emigrated to the Bronx and married an Austrian engineer and lived on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx and was the organist in a church where I knew her very, very well and grew up with her. So her memories of her father are really what lit the light inside of me.
What have you learned by making this documentary?
I have learned that there are certain themes and traits that are global and timeless. And we've been able to trace them back through our ancestors and their humanistic values, their values of coming together and having house parties of music in the chamber music and art song world. And I've tapped into that element in all of the cities that we've traveled to. They have art, song, and chamber music soirees and salons in all of these cities. We had a performance by the top soprano in Cuba, Johanna Simon, inside La Casa de las Tejas Verdes in Havana, and she sang all of his art songs with Claudia Lastra, the pianist. So I've tapped into that, and it's a way to connect. Going back to Lico's childhood, you asked about that. When he was performing inside the Palacio Cantero in Trinidad, Cuba, he was heard by a German cellist named Karl Werner. And Karl Werner had just lost his accompanist, and he said, can I hire? He was a free black, so he paid him. Can I hire that 12, 13-year-old child? We don't know exactly how old he was then, to tour Cuba to all the theaters, and the trains had just been built in Cuba. So they toured Cuba performing, and when Lico came back to Trinidad, his father was worried about the 10-year war that it was about to break out. So he concertized among the society class and raised the money to send his two sons alone on a 63-day boat ride to Hamburg. When they arrived in Hamburg, in 1868, they had a letter introducing them to the Felix Mendelssohn School of Music, where they ended up studying with Moscheles and Reinecke, Karl Reinecke. And then they were asked to join the Gewandhaus Orchestra. And they would perform concerts in the Gewandhaus plaza outside. There were free concerts, and everybody came. They were the most popular, partly because it was a bit of a exotic thing to see these world-class musicians playing the most difficult Rubinstein and most difficult music pieces, Franz Liszt and Wagner. And so everybody came, and that's how they raised the money to travel to 200 concerts all around Europe, all the way to Russia and into Austria and France and Belgium, and they performed in all of the spas. So when we were in Germany, we went to close to the Czech border to Bad Elster, and we filmed there with a drone. We filmed with drones at the different cemeteries where the different family members were buried. And we traveled to France, to Tours, to Chateau Chenonceau. They were the house musicians at Chateau Chenonceau during the Belle Epoque. And that brings us all the way back to the Queen Mary, because Lico composed a piece called Valse Caprice. Caprice, it's in French. I don't know how to say it. Waltz Caprice. And it is so difficult and so enthusiastic a waltz. And it reminds me of Toulouse-Lautrec. And I started reading about Chateau Chenonceau, which was a castle of feminist thought. It was owned by a woman, Madame Pelou, and the trio lived there for a year as the house musicians. And there was a very libertine time, and Flaubert and a lot of the artists from Paris, from the Paris Hashish Society, came and they partied in the Belle Epoque at Chateau Chenonceau. And the world was going through terrible political upheaval, but there was also this freedom of thought in music and dance. And that's kind of aligned with what we've seen in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s in our country and around the world. So we're having this Belle Epoque event where it's a fundraiser to raise our editing budget because, like I said, the grant money has dried up. So it's on Lico's 174th birthday, on the Queen Mary, and I've invited musicians to learn the songs, to buy the music through Dos Acordes in Galicia, Spain. It's all on the website, licojimenez.com. And to compete, we have 9 superstar judges. The first round judges are the stars in Europe who are the masters of Lico's music. Teresa Novoa, a master mezzo-soprano, glorious voice. Jessica Sanchez, who's the pianist, and Isidro Betancourt. So everybody sends their tape in to those, a videotape unedited of them playing a piece of Lico's music. They send it in to us, and those judges pick the first round. And then the second round of judges are live at the Queen Mary on December 7th. And then the star judges from Los Angeles are Dr. Russell Steinberg, who directs the LA Youth Orchestra, Leela Submarian, who's a glorious soprano from Long Beach Opera, and Maria Newman and Scott Hosfeld from the MAMA, the Montgomery House Art House and Malibu Coast Music Festival. So they are the judges here in Los Angeles.
One final question, Julie. If Lico were alive, what do you think he would think of what you are doing, you and your other co-producers? And
I'll show you, this is his, I can't send it to you, but this is him, and he sits on my desk. And I say, and then sometimes this poster here behind me, you can sometimes see that, I think that he would say, it's bigger than all of us. The music is bigger than all of us. And discovering every orchestra I've spoken to saying, we love discovering an artist that has been buried for all this time. So we rescued, republished, and recorded and revived the music of José Manuel Lico Jiménez Berroa, thanks to people like you.
well, thank you for everything that you're doing. We'd like to invite you back when that documentary is completed. Please let us know.
Thank you so much, Saida. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of American Stories. I'm Saida Pagan.